Friends, there are nerves in Moscow in Putin's inner circle. What happened? Today, for the first time since the start of the full-scale invasion of Ukraine, Putin has essentially sent a signal about the frozen assets, saying yes, they can be used, including by Putin's own goodwill. Can you imagine? So something has gone wrong, and Putin is now allowing these assets, allowing them to be used. For now, only by the United States of America. The Kremlin's inner circle has now gathered sources, yes, opinions within Putin's entourage on this matter, and not everyone is pleased with this statement. But before we read the reactions to this statement, let's take a look at exactly how and to whom Putin told all of this. You've probably heard we are ready to allocate $1 billion to this new structure of the Sumi Union, primarily and mainly to support the Palestinian people, to direct these funds towards the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip, and generally to address the problems of Palestine. But as I've already said, these funds are those that were frozen in the US under the previous administration. I think this is entirely possible. We have discussed such options before with representatives of the American administration, and today a meeting and negotiations on this topic are planned in Moscow. So a few points right away. Putin is meeting with Mahmoud Abbas, the president of Palestine, who I think has come to Moscow today, not by coincidence. At the same time, as you know, Trump is speaking in Davos, and so is Volodymyr Zelensky. Everyone, in one way or another, is touching on the topic of the Peace Council, and today the charter of that very Peace Council was signed. We'll talk about this later. But Putin makes his move, meets with President Abbas of Palestine, and declares that he is not opposed to the $1 billion currently frozen in the United States being used as a contribution to the Peace Council. Obviously, this is Putin's agreement to be represented in this organization, in this alliance, and for the money to be used for the needs of the Palestinian Authority or Palestine, or for the reconstruction of the Gaza Strip. This can already be called by different names. But the moment of shock comes next. Here you go, the Kremlin's inner circle, those close to the Kremlin, to Putin's circle and the presidential administration. A Telegram channel writes the following. Putin sent a public signal to the US, which upset many in Moscow. Putin declared his readiness to use Russian assets frozen in the US to restore territories affected by the fighting. According to the president, this can be done after a peace agreement is signed between Russia and Ukraine. Today, Putin is essentially talking about a different billion. In other words, there was a statement about $1 billion for the restoration of affected territories in Ukraine, and now $1 billion for the restoration of Gaza. Amid rising support for ending the special military operation, this statement sounds interesting. Operation goals remain unmet. Negotiations are proceeding with extreme difficulty. The Kremlin has sent signals several times that no one is going to sign peace with Zelensky, and in general, Ukraine must officially enter Russia's sphere of influence. And then there are statements like this, said a source among major businessmen close to the Kremlin. In other words, Putin is now, contrary to the position of his inner circle, starting to show weakness and is essentially acting preemptively. The tactic here, it seems to me, is clear in how it looks. To appeal to Donald Trump, to show that it is possible to cooperate with the Russian Federation, to show that Russia, before Trump and Putin personally, keeps his word and adheres to those principles that they talked about 250 times, which were reached in Anchorage in August of last year. That is the frozen assets, $5 billion, plus the frozen assets on the territory of the United States. Putin has, in fact, over the last 2 days, twice given his permission to use $2 billion. $2 billion. That's, well, basically, if you count it, that's 40% of all the billions frozen in the United States. He gives it to Trump as a gift. Go ahead, use it, please. Do you want it in The Hague? And what does Trump want in The Hague? Look, what does he want in The Hague? In The Hague, this is what Trump wants. He wants to build hotels there. Trump still hasn't given up on the idea of building a resort there. At the Peace Council meeting, they presented a concept today for the future of the Gaza Strip. And this concept, you see, this is what it looks like. What beautiful slides. And of course, now the assessment is that he's a businessman. And Putin says, go ahead, but in exchange for what exactly? And what he wants in exchange, he'll reveal, he said this evening, that's the second point. But most likely it will happen tomorrow evening. What will happen tomorrow evening? Witkoff and Kushner are flying to Moscow, and that's an obvious accomplished fact. There were many warnings, but they will show up in Moscow. Everything depended on how the meeting between Trump and Zelensky would go. The meeting lasted, friends, less than 40 minutes. It happened, and thank God Trump said, okay, let them go. That means they're bringing something specific. There's some kind of proposal. A proposal worth at least 2 billion for Putin today. He wouldn't have seen that money anyway, so I don't understand why his business circle is so surprised about it. This money is lost to the Russian Federation, to Putin forever. But now it can play to Putin's advantage. He turned it around, my friends. This is a chessboard that looks exactly like this. And that diminutive, balding individual currently residing in Moscow, he meticulously calculated every single detail a very long time ago. Now, Donald Trump can provide a firm and absolute guarantee that he will completely and permanently write off those $5 billion for Putin. For what? For the fact that he will likely agree to those 20 points that have already been written and agreed upon by Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. Now, a few words about the Peace Council. So, in fact, Putin, who claims that he is ready to part with those 2 billion, one for gas, the other for Ukraine, is actually joining this crazy format, which could become an alternative to the United Nations friends. That's right, to the Peace Council. Today, Trump declared himself the head of this Peace Council. There are already 21 members. You can already see in these photos, for example, the president of Kazakhstan is standing there. But there's a more general photo where Aliyev is in the front rows, and Milei from Argentina is also spotted in this picture. So this is a very interesting story that is unfolding right before our eyes. And obviously there was no representative from Russia there. No one invited them to Davos, but in fact they are already there. Regarding the money, there was also a rather interesting double move from everyone's favorite Belgian Prime Minister, Mr. Bart de Wever, who basically, if you remember, said, they'll tear me apart if I give this money to Ukraine. I'm not ready to risk my life and end my career as a janitor. These were literally de Wever's words a month ago regarding whether it is possible to give the frozen assets for Ukraine's reconstruction right now while the war is still ongoing. Belgium's position is a definite no. And in Belgium, friends, the largest amount of these Russian assets is being held. So today he is once again speaking out. At the same time, yes, again talking about money. And Bart de Wever is being very cunning. He says that all assets of the Russian Federation will remain frozen until the end of the war. This can be interpreted in different ways. That is, on the one hand, they will remain frozen so that they are not given to Ukraine and so that Belgium is not made into a scapegoat, as De Wever says, in the eyes of the Russian Federation. But on the other hand, this is also a response to both Trump and Putin. Putin can do whatever he wants with the frozen assets in America. That's America's business. But if he tries to pull something similar, like saying he's ready to give a frozen billion for the needs of the European Union, for example, or something like that, it's unlikely anyone would agree to it. That's what's happening. In other words, Europe is now outright blocking Putin from managing the money, but Trump isn't. And Trump still has a reserve, another 3 billion. So are these billions of dollars truly enough to buy an official agreement from Vladimir Putin for a comprehensive and lasting ceasefire right now? This is the absolutely most critical question we face, and the final resolution is currently extremely close. During tonight, tomorrow morning early, and through the first half of the day.